the regulatory side of the guardrails.
Yeah.
And I'm a believer that innovation does require regulation. And without it, we're creating more long-term problems and hurting a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I'm not a believer that innovation is, going to get hit if we have the right regulations. And we need to have the right legislators, the right policymakers with the domain expertise and the teams to be able to advise on what that could look like. So I'm all about creativity, and this is why I'm passionate about this space.
Welcome to Justice Rewired, the official podcast of the National Bar Association with Ashley Upkins. Today's guest is Katrina Rosseini, a recognized expert and strategist in cybersecurity, quantum computing, and AI. She advises founders, policymakers, and VCs on positioning the United States in global economic competition with national security at the core.
I'm sitting here this afternoon with Dr. Katrina Rosseini. Dr. Rosseini, your work sits at the intersection of technology, policy, even law. Talk to me a little bit about how you got in this high stakes arena, and also give me a little bit of background about you. We want to know about you.
Happy to do so. My story is not your typical story because, so I'm an immigrant, not born in the United States. My parents came here after the 79 revolution in Iran. And they just wanted to make sure that their daughter, their firstborn, had the chance to have the freedoms that were taken away from them. And as we know right now with what's happening in the world, it's a scary time. And so with a lot of gratitude, I grew up knowing that I wanted to be part of a real purpose. I was on the board of directors of a hospital, a safety net community hospital, for about 14 years in the East Bay area in California. And being part of that community where we serve the underserved, the immigrant community, those that didn't have as much access and resources, it was near and dear to my heart because I grew up understanding what that meant, very much so. And so I saw it as not only a responsibility, but a purpose to be able to make a difference in spaces that not just intrigued me, but innovation was something I was always drawn to. Our hospital was unfortunately hit with a ransomware attack. And most people don't have an understanding of when a ransomware attack, a cybersecurity attack occurs, it affects not just the hospital from a financial standpoint, it affects the community. It affects those who already have a scarcity in resources, whether it's the minorities, Latino, Asian, African American, it doesn't matter. It affects human lives. And so I started spending a little bit more time seeing the implications and how often this type of thing occurs from a security standpoint. And I got immersed in the space because of being on the board of directors of a hospital during that time and engaging further. And at the time, I was also finishing or doing my doctorate in engineering and chose cybersecurity as the specialization. Now, that's the foundation of how I got into the space without having a traditional engineering background. I didn't grow up with mentors or resources. I grew up with parents who barely even spoke English, and I had to kind of figure it out for myself. And I said, hey, they took the step to bring me into this country and raise me in this place. It's my responsibility to do something bigger.
Yes.
And so that's how I ended up with the passion and drive to be in an emerging technology space that's not only has a lot of good that could come from it, and it does, but it also has a lot of implications to all of us.
So speaking of implications, talk to us a little bit about quantum computing and AI. It's really kind of redefining risk and how we look and view and exposure, right, that we assess. Talk to me a little bit about how we should be thinking about those things from a legal perspective.
It's interesting. It's like, has a bit of a wild, wild west vibe, I'm sure, from a legal standpoint, positioning, well, how do you really look at, for example, quantum computing today when it's not really viable? The technology is not there yet. But we're hearing from folks that 10, 15 years out, and then others who are saying, IBM CEO, for example, came out at Davos and said it's about 3 years out.
Right.
We believe that from a domain standpoint, that it could be potentially a 5-6 year number when it comes to actually seeing it in the enterprise space. So what does that really mean? It means that things are moving really fast. Regulation is behind. And that's a formula for disaster, if I were to say so.
Absolutely.
And I think that is a piece that with, whether it's AI or quantum, that I'm seeing personally. I was at the CEO Connection conference about a year ago where I moderated the AI panel, and we had C-suites from 200 million to about 3 billion in revenues in the room, packed room. And I went table to table to see what kind of feedback they were giving. And the pattern that I saw, what was interesting was that there's fear, there's uncertainty, how to actually take advantage, use AI for their company, and are they opening areas that they're not familiar with, which is going to put them in a bad situation, whether it's an attack surface or it's just not understanding something and causing more problems to their companies and organizations. So we're there today, and only the larger enterprise-sized companies, which have the resources, can work with the consultancies. What about the rest of them? What about the bloodline of our economy, which is the small and medium-sized companies? Then you add on the new layer, which is now quantum is on the forefront of all this. So it's an interesting time. So I don't know if I touched on that question, but there's a lot to be addressed.
And I think you identified something so important, that you have what I see right in our legal community.
Yeah.
In my head as president of National Bar is, you have some companies that are fully embracing AI, although there are policies versus laws that are really kind of defining that. And then you're also seeing individuals that, since they don't understand the technology, then they're fearful. And so it's like, let me bury my head in the sand and maybe it'll go away, which it's not, is what I'm hearing. And so let's move a bit, speaking kind of threat, right? Talk to us a little bit about the Queen framework. I love the name.
Yes. So I'm the managing partner of a new venture called the Queen's Gambit. So GMBT for Gambit. And that came about because a different division, Dark Knight Ventures, tapped into me to focus on the emerging technology space. So cybersecurity, AI, quantum, when it comes to specifically the healthcare sector.
Okay.
How the emerging technologies that we're talking about today are going to vastly benefit certain sectors, specifically healthcare. I mean, healthcare has so much regulation already, as we know, but then there's all of the, optimization and potential benefits that AI and hence quantum will make happen ideally. But with it also comes a lot of risk. So Queen Framework was really something after attending being a moderator at the panel with the CEO Connection, I walked away saying, if we're not prepared on AI, how are we going to be prepared for quantum when it comes to governance? Governance is a very hot topic with GRC, obviously, from a legal standpoint. I don't need to preach to the choir. But more importantly, it doesn't exist today. So I took the NIST, National Institute of Security Technologies framework that was recently rolled out on AI. And I basically created from that the quantum framework, which I call the Queen. And it's a long acronym. That's why Queen, QUEN, is in there. But it ties into the work I'm doing too with the Queen's Gambit, because I am all about the founders and the investors and the legal community, collaborating with those folks to basically drive the innovation that we do need for the impact that we're seeking going forward. Yes. And so that is how it all came together.
I love that. And I love the name. I love the full name. It's one of my favorite movies,
and
actually.
Being a woman in the space too,
Exactly.
I want to leverage something that people are going to remember, because there's so much technical jargon out there, and bringing something that small. And the best part of it is I'm writing this, or I'm building this around small businesses as well as enterprise, not just the enterprise level. So that small businesses can also take action, because at the end of the day, it's their fiduciary responsibility also, whether it's PII information, whether it's, basically any assets or information that has to outlive quantum.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I don't know how technically knowledgeable people are, but at the end of the day, if once quantum is viable, the risk there is the cryptography, the encryptions behind it. So if those encryptions are breakable, how does an organization deal with that scenario? And that is happening today, which goes into the Queen. It all came about fruition because I was out there talking about the harvest now, decrypt later issue in quantum that people are not addressing, which I
share a little bit about that for our viewers.
Absolutely. And this is something that I would love to actually further advise, whether it's the legal community, the business community, and so forth, further on it. But the harvest now, decrypt later is basically, we're seeing it, it's happening. We don't know which organization companies are going to be affected, but it's when our adversaries, so whether it's China or Iran or Russia, when those nation state adversaries are going to basically get into our systems, whether it's our critical infrastructure and so forth, which occurred. Volt typhoon breach a couple of years ago occurred where we didn't know they were sitting in our critical infrastructure for 5 years. We found out roughly 5 years later that China had a state-sponsored group that was able to laterally move into our critical infrastructure and live off the land, which means they were harvesting the data, harvesting the information. They weren't able to decrypt it today, but when quantum is viable, whether that's in the 3 to 6 year time frame, then they'll be able to decrypt all of it at once. Now, what is that going to look like from a legal standpoint? What is that going to look like from a fiduciary standpoint? From basically the markets globally, geopolitically? So it's a very it's a big issue today. It's not just a quantum issue in the future. It's happening now. We just don't know which companies have actually been affected.
This summer in Nashville, Tennessee, the 101st Annual National Bar Association Convention. From an exclusive visit to the historic Uncle Nearest Distillery to the elegance of the President's Ball aboard the iconic General Jackson, experience the power of history and sound with the legendary Fisk Jubilee Singers and explore Black excellence at the National Museum of African American Music. Relax among lush indoor gardens and unforgettable views. Then cap the week with fireworks lighting up the Nashville sky. This is more than a convention. It's culture, leadership, and legacy. Save the date. Join us July 25th through July 31st in Nashville, Tennessee.
I love, so talk a little bit about, I loved your explanation, but talk a little bit about what that means when you're talking about harvesting data for the day-to-day person that may not be in these spaces. What does that mean for them?
So organizations, like we all obviously have credit cards. We're all part of banks. We're all part of different, to live in the civilized society we're in, we're all connected, right? We all have various interconnected information from our personal information, PII, our healthcare information, or even companies like M&A information, private secret military information. Everything we have has encrypted information typically tied to it if it's an asset-based type of a organization. Well, all of that information basically will be breakable because how do they secure all that today? They secure it with classical encryptions, which is what we use today in our world.
Yes.
And in the future, when those computers, we call them quantum computers, once those computers are actually capable, which is where we're at right now, we're at that intersection, it's coming up. And if we're not prepared from transitioning from the existing encryptions we're using, and I won't get too technical with it, to the post-quantum encryption and or have the viable solution for it. I mean, NIST came out recently, about a year or so ago, with new algorithms that are the updated ones, but those have to constantly get updated. And there's an issue too. I mean, when you talk about critical infrastructure, those devices are legacy systems. They can't just be messed with because that could take an entire grid or entire electrical system down.
Yes.
So the rip and repair won't work, or rip and replace, won't work. So what will work? And this is why we're on forefronts of talking about quantum from a PQC, post-quantum cryptography angle. And that is why it's such a hot topic right now.
Yes. And to kind of bring it full circle for our viewers, to put it in the simplest terms, is, imagine having a vault where you have all of your priceless or, your valuable items. And so there's now a tool that eventually can figure out the code to that vault.
Without ever telling them what it is. They could just
Exactly.
break it just like magic, just because they now have the technology that could do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for providing a more humanized version of it. Sometimes
Well,
I
you're
get
expert in the space, right? So, just bring it
here I'm
down.
thinking I'm actually simplifying it because I'm like, I'm not using acronyms, but
It's a
no,
very
you got
complicated
it. It
space,
is.
and I think that's that's why this conversation is so important because
Right.
it is right, and we need people understanding on every layer of this
Absolutely.
conversation. And so, speaking of which, you advise government and private sector leaders. Where do you see, speaking of talking different terms, where do you see the biggest disconnect when you're trying to get people to understand the problem and act on the problem?
I think there's a lot of hype in the news and a lot of propaganda, a lot of politicizing. I mean, I'll give you an example. With, NVIDIA CEO about a year or so ago, roughly, came out saying, quantum computing is like 20 years out. Well, the quantum sector came around and said, well, that's not actually accurate. There's already quantum optimization types of companies that are publicly traded that are doing things today.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of confusion and noise in the space. I always say keep the hype out, because realistically, if you focus on the wrong thing, you're not really going to address what you can control today, right?
Yeah.
So what can we control today? Well, if we know things are getting harvested today, what can we do other than just, focusing on the compliance element of this? Compliance to me, see, I've been on a board of directors of a hospital, so I can speak on governance and compliance all day. But to me, it's not just checking off a bunch of boxes and saying, okay, we're compliant, and just sitting there and just saying, let's move on to the next thing. It's about actually taking action. It's actually applying. Now what, right?
Yes.
So the framework is just the starting point for conversation, whether it's at the board level, whether it's at the C-suite level, whether it's just at the educational level, to know what are the things you can actually do to address the attack surface, to address the vulnerabilities, right, that we are finding. So if your assets, for example, do use encryptions and you're an organization, well, you should be having these conversations, and transitioning to post-quantum doesn't happen overnight. It takes years at times with some organizations. So these are the types of compliance-focused conversations to be had, and then next steps. What types of solutions need to happen?
And I think you're hitting on something, because so many times as lawyers, it's like, what's the standard? Okay, we met the standard. But we also need to be looking at, is meeting your fiduciary duty now?
Right.
Is it going to be looked at that you're meeting it in the
love
future?
you're bringing this up now.
Yes.
Now, you'll appreciate this. Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yes.
Publicly traded companies.
Yes.
Because they're signing, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll rely on you on this, but there are sections in the Sarbanes-Oxley that CEOs and CFOs have to sign, saying that based on today, I am signing from a personal liability, right, standpoint, that these things are all valid based on today. Well, how do you know that as a C-suite who's signing that your data and your information has not already been harvested?
Yes.
Because you signed that today, but in the future, it could be decrypted.
Absolutely.
And you don't even know. So
Or
where
what
the
if you did
liabilities
know?
are.
Right. What if you did know and you failed to act, and it wasn't a big deal then because the decryption wasn't happening?
I think lawyers are going to be quite busy.
Yes.
Once quantum is viable. Yeah.
So I'll close out with this question. Since we're on the topic of emerging technologies and future and the legal space, what emerging technologies do you believe are really going to kind of reshape law? You've hit on it a little bit.
Oh my goodness, you're asking me a fun question here. So there are companies I advise today, and I work with founders. I also advise VCs, smart money side in the space too, as a domain expert. And I've always appreciated looking at where the future is going. What types of tools or technologies do we really need? I speak to things that create real impact, the tangibles. So for me, it's not about following the hype or something exciting. It's about real tangible implications, right? So there are a handful of companies I work today, for example, in the healthcare space. I sat on a board of a hospital 14 years, fiduciary obligation to, obviously make the right choices in that role. After leaving a hospital, our hospital got acquired back in late 2024. One of the companies that actually was our hospital was the first client of theirs. They were able to work with hospitals on their cost optimization of the drugs in their inpatient side. They came to me and I said, listen, this is needed because hospitals are already suffering when it comes to so many things. Again, won't get into the details yet. I know we don't have that much time, but the bottom line cost, you can only cut so much, no pun intended, you can cut to the bone, we say in most ways, but you can't go past that. So money is a scarcity in these environments, and especially in the rural and community hospitals.
Absolutely.
So having a company that can go in there and save potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars to the bottom line because they just made an optimization decision on which drugs to keep on hand, that's going to benefit not only the hospital's bottom line to keep the doors open, to keep the emergency room doors open and so forth, and give that community the hospital they deserve, right, as a cardiac STEMI center or whatever, but also quality of care. Yes. As soon as I learned about what they're doing and the fact that the quality of care only goes up while the savings and or money, the hospital's funding is also benefiting from this,
Yes.
there's typically not a correlation there. So I get to advise companies like that who are making an impact to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives in a positive way, because it's one innovation using AI as an optimization. So this is why I do what I do, and this is why I enjoy being able to work with founders who are making that difference.
I love that. And I love the idea that you can save money, but then still keep that quality of care top notch for everyday people.
And that's the part of emerging technology we don't talk about regularly.
Yes.
There's a lot of, and again, I think the piece that we didn't really touch on big time was the regulatory side of the guardrails.
Yeah.
And I'm a believer that innovation does require regulation.
Absolutely.
And without it, we're creating more long-term problems and hurting a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I'm not a believer that innovation is, going to get hit if we have the right regulations. And we need to have the right legislators, the right policymakers with the domain expertise and the teams to be able to advise on what that could look like. So I'm all about creativity, and this is why I'm passionate about the space.
Tell me a little bit about what you think about the regulatory landscape of AI.
I think the important thing there is regulation doesn't necessarily have to hinder innovation, and regulation is a necessity. And one of my concerns really is that how do you expect states to individually impose the level of regulation that maybe has some control coming from the federal level, when the push is to have the least amount of regulation imposed in AI because of innovation? On one end of this conversation, I get that innovation is important because we're in a tech cold war with China, and we want to be the first ones in the space to really be driving it economically. But national security is just as important.
Absolutely.
Because they go hand in hand. I mean, that's, global economies are affected. I'm also not one who likes that when real problems of such that are not yet created, we have the ability to get in front of them,
Yes.
and we don't do the right thing. I'm a believer that there should be uniform laws at the federal level that states should follow. They shouldn't be dumped onto states to take that on. They don't have the capacity and or maybe even the domain expertise, as we were talking about with policy makers and decision makers. I think it's a piece that the federal government should take on and actually have it be a uniform across the country.
Yes.
Or we're going to have many more problems to be discussing down the road, including implications that we created because of bad decisions.
And as a quick follow-up, we've seen that work successfully in some other countries. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. And why are they doing it that way? Let's think about that for a second. And why are we not? Even though we're a economy that's all about innovation, it doesn't mean that we should just throw the legalities and the implications. I mean, we're talking about human lives here, right?
Absolutely.
When we have AI making decisions for healthcare, and there are healthcare organizations that do that today, but we're not even informing them that this is how decisions are made. It's a disservice to the public. It is a disservice to our families, to our communities, especially the underserved communities.
I love this. Well, Katrina, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It sounds like we need a part 2
Yes.
to discuss the boundaries. And I think that's what many of us are struggling with right now, is even helping inform policymakers on what the boundaries should be, especially with something that's ever changing. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Absolutely.
And we hope to have you back
I look
in the
forward
very
to it.
near future.
Part 2. Looking forward to it.
Yes, part 2.